Yeah, hello. Let us discuss more about uh, the project planning. Uh, so we'll go in detail. So far we completed the basic definitions, and then we discussed about project initiation. And in initiation, we had two processes. The first one was develop project charter, and the second process was identify stakeholders. So these two were performed by the project sponsor. Now, during the chartering process, we appointed a project manager, we defined the roles and responsibilities of the project manager. Now, the project manager takes the project into the planning phase. Uh, and what what exactly a project manager does during the planning phase, we'll be discussing now. And coming back to the exam perspective, you will get around 23% of the questions from the planning uh, process group, the planning phase. Now, within planning, these are the processes. The first process is the develop project management plan, then plan scope management, then collect requirements, define scope, create work breakdown structure, then plan schedule management, define activities, sequence activities, estimate activity resources, estimate activity durations, develop schedule, plan cost management, estimate costs, determine budgets, and plan quality management, plan human resource management, plan communications management, plan risk management, identify risk, perform quantitative risk analysis, plan risk responses, plan procurement management, and plan stakeholder management. So the planning process group has the maximum content. So we need to spend more time in understanding planning. So once we master planning, then execution is very easy because it is just implementing the plan or running the project as per the plan. Then we have quite a lot to understand in monitoring and controlling, especially the earned value management and stuff like that. Then we get into closing. So the planning has the major chunk of the contents. And we'll see each of these processes in detail as we proceed. Now, let us see the first process under planning, that is the develop project management plan. This is the process of documenting the actions necessary to define, prepare, integrate, and coordinate all the subsidiary plans. So, if you take a project, the project manager owns the entire project and he comes out with the integrated project plan. Whereas there can be, or rather, there will be different teams, subsidiary teams like the engineering team, the business analyst teams, the quality assurance teams, the risk management teams, the documentation teams, the test teams. So all these sub teams will come out with subsidiary plans, which must be integrated into a cohesive, integrated project management plan. And the dates, everything, the start date, end date, everything must be synchronized. For this, we need to define the tools, the templates, the method, the timelines, the dependency issues. So everything must be defined. So the whole process of doing that, we call it as the develop project management plan. So in real life, we used to call it as a plan for planning, because the biggest issue we used to face was by the time the plan is ready, the project is almost 20% or 30% completed. So that was an issue. So we used to come out with a plan for planning. We lay out the basic, the project plan templates, and then the timelines, the dependency issues, everything defined, and then get the plan out by a particular date. So we need to do a lot of work to make that happen. So that comes under the develop project management plan. Uh, the inputs of develop project management plan, if you see, it is a project charter, which is an output of initiation, and outputs from other planning processes. We already discussed, like a QA plan, a risk management plan, a procurement management plan, a human resource plan, a communications plan. So all these plans will be done or can be done by different entities, and the outputs from all these plans becomes an input for your developed project management plan. Then enterprise environmental factor and organizational process assets, we already discussed these things. So I'm not spending more time on it. The tool and technique is expert judgment, and the output is the project management plan. Again, a project management plan is not your schedule. It is most A project management plan is a document which will explain. It is a document, and the schedule is only part of your project plan. The contents of a project management plan we'll discuss as we proceed. So here it is. A project plan typically contains the project approach or a strategy for executing the project. Uh, the scope, like the joint, is it a joint effort between you and your customer? Are you considering outsourcing as an approach? What about concurrent engineering, reusable components, uh, strategic alliances? So all these things can come under project approach slash strategy. Then scope statement, uh, then a work breakdown structure, which we'll see as we proceed. Then the cost estimates, schedule, start and end dates, the responsibility assignments, performance measurement baselines, the required staff, and the subsidiary management plans, like the scope management plan, schedule management plan, cost management plan, risk management plan, staff management plan, quality management plan, the contract management plan. Uh, what is a project strategy? Now, recently I came across a project manager who had a very stiff deadline to meet. It was a construction project, and their strategy was, see, it is very difficult to meet that deadline. So they adopted. See, it was a high-rise building and apartment kind, as a hospital building where almost every floor is same. And the most time-consuming thing in that kind of building was finishing of the bathrooms and the toilets, because it involves a lot of plumbing and electrical work. Then suddenly somebody came out with an idea like, let us go with prefabricated toilets. So that engineering decision helped them to bring in a lot of concurrency into the schedule, which helped them to reduce the schedule duration. So somebody has thought about a strategy for meeting those deadlines. So we need to spend some time and document it. Sometimes this slide, this framework may help. Now, whatever projects we are getting, it has two parameters, like the type of requirements we are getting, maybe erratic or fluctuating or routine or stable. And then we have the type of technology we are using for the product, that is bleeding edge, leading edge, familiar, or well known. Well known, everybody knows. Familiar is okay. Leading edge is something leading. Bleeding edge means not many people have worked on that technology. Your team is going to work on it. You're going to lead it. So if the technology is bleeding edge, leading edge, kind of thing, and if the requirements are erratic and fluctuating, then we need a kind of a, it's more of an R&D kind of a project. So we need more of a rapid prototyping or an iterative approach, because the requirements are highly volatile and the technology is very new to the team. Then we need trial and error or rapid prototyping, iterative or incremental models. The same time, if the requirements are very stable and if the technology is familiar and well known to the team, we can always go with a kind of plan, do, check, and act, where yeah, we plan things first, then try to do things as per the plan. Once in a while, we check and see whether things are going as per the plan, and then if there is a variation, you take action. That is, a PDCA is ideal for where the requirements are very clear and the technology is well known. Whereas when the requirements are not that clear and the technology is bleeding edge or leading edge, we have to go with the PDSA kind of approach, where we do rapid plan, do, study, and act cycles. Don't spend too much time in planning. You do some plan, then try to do things as per the plan. You may fail, you may succeed, study from it, then act. And with that learning, you get into the next PDSA, plan, do, study, and act. So that is another approach. So the type of requirements and the type of technology can drive your project strategy. Then we move on to the second process under develop project management plan. The inputs are the project management plan, which comes from the develop project management plan process, the project charter, which comes from the initiation process group. Then we have the enterprise environmental factors and the organizational process assets. And the tools and techniques for plan scope management are the expert judgment and meetings. The output is the scope management plan and the requirements management plan. See, when we start the project, we have a very a bird's eye view, a very high level scope only, a statement of work, then a high level scope, and we did the estimation, everything based on that high level scope. And now it is time to get into the detailed scope. For that, we need to create a plan, how to define the detailed scope, because it involves maybe interviewing a lot of relevant stakeholders. It involves travel. Somebody has to collect the requirements. Somebody has to analyze it, collate it, analyze it, then come out with the recommendations, then the approvals. Then based on the detailed requirements, again, budgeting, scheduling. Yeah, it's quite a lot of work. So somebody need to, so there should be a plan for scope management. So we are talking about that plan. So the output is the scope management plan. The plan will tell you how we are going to manage the scope. There are two types of scope. One is a product scope, and the next one is a project scope. So what is a product scope? Product scope primarily talks about the features of the product, whereas the project scope talks about the number of people involved, the number of locations involved, um, that kind of thing, uh, and the scope of the magnitude of work involved. So that is the project scope, whereas the product scope is about the features of the product. Then once the scope management plan is completed, then maybe we have collect requirements. That is the third process under planning. So this is the process of defining and documenting stakeholders' needs to meet the project objectives. So while constructing a house, we start by saying, I need a house, maybe 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms and car park and dining and blah, blah. Now, when it comes to the collect requirements phase, it is about the details, dimensions of every room, the flooring, the lighting, the interior decorations. We get into the micro things. For that, we need to understand the stakeholder needs to meet the project objectives. For collecting requirements, the inputs side are uh, the scope management plan, requirements management plan, stakeholder management plan, project charter, and a stakeholder register. So all these things come in as an input. And the tools and techniques we use for collect requirements are the interviews, process groups, facilitated workshops, group creativity techniques, like brainstorming, Delphi. So those things we'll discuss when we proceed. Then group decision making techniques like voting, questionnaires and surveys, observations, prototypes, benchmarking, context diagrams, and document analysis. So these things will lead to or can guide us into collecting the right requirements. And the output is the requirements documentation and requirements traceability matrix. So what is a requirements traceability matrix? Throughout the project, we should ensure that the requirements collected is matching to the product. So we can always, so after collecting the requirements, maybe we get into the design phase of the project, and the output of the design are the features of the product of the project. So there should be one-to-one mapping between the requirements given by the client and the features of the product. So if there is no one-to-one mapping, if there is no mapping between the features and the requirements, either you may end up delivering some features which the customer did not ask for, or there can be some features, there can be some requirements which are not met by the product, which will come out during the acceptance test. So maintaining a requirements traceability matrix is uh, is very critical. Uh, you can always use an Excel sheet where one column vertically you put the requirements and horizontally you put the features of the product, and then you try to map. If there is something without mapping, either it is redundant or it is lacking in the product. So we call it as a requirements traceability matrix. So if you want, you can extend it further. So basic is the requirements given by mapping from the requirements given by the client to the features of the product. Then define scope is the process of defining a detailed description of the project and the product. So after collecting the requirements, we define the scope. Here again, the inputs are the scope management plan, the project charter, the requirements documentation, and other organizational process assets. The tools and techniques are expert judgment, the product analysis, alternatives identification, alternatives generation, and facilitated workshop. Expert judgment, it's okay, we have already explained it. Uh, Product analysis, we'll talk about it in the subsequent slides. Alternatives identification. So when I was constructing my house, the architect asked me, I wanted a swimming pool in my house. And the architect was slightly apprehensive about giving me a swimming pool because it will drive up the building cost as well as the maintenance cost. And he interviewed me and asked me questions like, do you have a swimming pool in the house where you're staying now? I said yes. how many years you have been staying there, 5 years, and how many times you use the pool, maybe 5 times. And he said, okay, I will not give you a swimming pool. The best alternative is to go for a club membership. You pay 5 lakhs, which is a fraction of the cost of the swimming pool. You get a lifelong membership in a premium club where, whenever you feel like swimming, you go and use the pool and get rid of the one-time investment and the maintenance cost and the associated headaches, everything. So that is a clean example of an alternative identification, which is a great tool that can be used while defining the scope. Then alternatives generation, only then you can get into, yeah, it both goes hand in hand. And sometimes facilitated workshops, as a group of people working together with the focus, with the intent to achieve something at the end of the workshop. Like at the end of this workshop, let us come out with an estimate for this set of uh, work packages. Or at the end of this particular workshop, let us come out with a 20% reduction from the traditional estimation for a particular work package. So then there is a goal specified for the workshop, and the team works towards that goal during the workshop, and it can be facilitated by an experienced facilitator, so that he can drive it to the achievement of the goal of the workshop. So we call it as facilitated workshops. So the output of defined scope is the project scope statement and the project document updates. So this is the fourth process under planning. First, we came out with the develop project management plan, then plan scope management, then collect requirements, then comes define scope. Once the scope statement is done, that becomes the basis for your future decisions, and it has a baseline for monitoring the sorry project scope, and state what will be included and what will not be included in the scope statement. That is a good attribute. So while defining the scope, you should say what all things will get into the product and what all things will not be there. So that is a good practice. For defining the project scope, the tools and techniques are expert judgment, product analysis, alternatives generation, and facilitated workshops. Product analysis. One of the techniques within product analysis is the function analysis. It is about analyzing all the things that a product does, including primary and related functions, to identify unnecessary functions that might drive up cost on the product. I'll repeat. Function analysis is all about analyzing all the things that a product does, including primary and related functions, to identify unnecessary functions that might drive up the cost on a product. An example, a swimming pool for a house may be required, may not be required. And once I include it, it is going to increase the initial cost as well as the maintenance cost. Value engineering and value analysis. Identifying and developing cost versus benefit ratio for each function of the product, especially when you are into product engineering. This becomes very critical. For every feature, you do a cost benefit analysis and then decide what are the must have features, what are the nice to have features, what are the features that are not required. So a cost benefit analysis at a feature level will help us to identify and developing cost versus benefit ratio for each function of the product. We call it as value engineering and value analysis. Then quality function deployment. It is about identifying what the customer's needs are and translating those needs into a technical requirements. So we spoke about a traceability metrics between the requirements to the features, a classical example of quality function deployment. On one y-axis, you put the requirements. On the x-axis, you put the features of the product, and try to map so that you can ensure that you conform to the agreed upon needs of the customer. So absolute satisfaction. So we call it, so yeah, so the generic term for that is quality function deployment. Then systems engineering, analyzing the products holistically. Sometimes the product will work perfectly within your test environment, but when you go for a deployment, this may not work because the real life conditions are different. So you have to ensure that. See, now there is this typical example: backward compatibility, forward compatibility, interoperability. So all these things must be ensured, and these things comes under the systems engineering aspect of product development. So these are different methods to that will drive you into the right requirements and the right scope. Uh, Alternatives identification. Any technique used to generate different ways to achieve the project goals, and it's a creative approach to problem solving. All the concepts and issues related to a problem are considered. The focus is on new thought pattern and fresh approach. Uh, so one of the Yeah, so it's a creative approach to team problem solving. All the concepts and issues related to problem are considered. The focus is on new thought pattern. And here, primarily, we are talking about maybe the out of the box thinking. Sometimes you ask blunt questions like, "Why should a car have doors on the sides? Is there any reason for that? Is it a good? Is it an efficient design?" Or why should a car have four wheels? Why it cannot be five, or why it cannot be six, or why it cannot be three? Or is there any other alternative than running on wheels? So which will lead you to maybe innovative approaches. Why should a car run on petrol or diesel? Is there any other way that will help you to maybe, yeah, that will guide you to innovation? Then brainstorming is about a group of people coming together and coming out with ideas, and you're allowed to build on each other's ideas as well. There will be a moderator. So you sit in a circle, there will be a moderator, and the topic is given, and each person will get opportunity to talk about that, and that will be recorded. Others can also share their ideas, and people are encouraged to build on top of others' ideas as well. And while brainstorming, there is no validation. The objective is to collect as much as ideas as possible. And sometimes we invite inexperienced people also to the brainstorming sessions so that we get more ideas, or new ideas rather. Then comes a Delphi technique. It's a group technique that extracts and summarizes anonymous group input to choose among various alternatives. Uh, and, it's about Delphi is always done by experts. We have used it for estimation, some work, estimating some work packages and all. The scope of the work is explained, and then experts are asked to estimate that work independently. That means while estimating, they cannot discuss among each other, and they estimate their work independently, and then come back, and they sit together and then discuss and debate and then converge on the right numbers based on consensus. That means we cannot go by averages, we cannot go by majority. Discussions will happen The pros and cons of each estimate will be discussed, and they agree on the most logical estimates or the most accurate estimates based on consensus from the group members. So that is Delphi technique. The basic difference between brainstorming and Delphi is always done by experts, whereas brainstorming we can include even inexperienced people as well. And in brainstorming, everything happens in the brainstorming room, whereas in Delphi, the real brain work, or rather the real work of estimation and stuff like that, happens independently. And with those estimates, they get into a room and then discuss, debate, and converge. And Delphi is always done by experts. We need people who are good at that particular work. Then only we can run Delphi. Let's proceed. So the next session is create work breakdown structure. So here we stop. So that will be in the subsequent video. So we stop here. So we discussed about the first four processes under the planning process group. So we started with the develop project management plan. Then we came out with plan scope management. Then we discussed about collect requirements. Then we discussed about define scope. Thank you.